cozy games are for girls, right? I mean, they're all about relationships, dress up, and cooking. None of those things appeal to men, right? We like shooting, fighting, and quick, difficult, intense, real games. Games where you just sit around and cook or buy and wear clothes. Those are boring and simple affairs, and we want none of that. In case you have difficulty reading social cues, I'm being sarcastic. But the question remains, why do so many of us still have this elementary school notion that certain games are only for girls and other, more betterer games are only for boys? Well, as you may have surmised, in order to even begin to answer that question, we need to look back at history and figure out where this whole girl games thing started anyway. Before I start though, I did want to give a disclaimer. This topic does necessitate the use of more binary gendered language, because I'm talking specifically about girl games, but I want to be clear, I'm by no means trying to exclude trans people from this discussion. This is a LGBTQ friendly space, so when I say men and women, I'm referring to everyone who fits under that umbrella. And to that point, I'm entirely uninterested in defining what a man and what a woman are. If that's what you're here for, I think you may have been horribly misguided by your algorithm. However, maybe this is a happy accident. Maybe you're willing to hear me out and have a mature adult conversation about this. In that case, welcome. Please do stick around and leave a comment if you want to talk about anything that I've mentioned. Just remember, please do be respectful of other commenters. Any abusive or unhelpful commenters will be, without hesitation, banned. Also, I'm not a video essayist. I'm not here to convince you of anything. I'm simply exploring this topic for myself because I'm a relatively recent member of the cozy game community, and these topics, which have been discussed by lots of others before me, are interesting to me, and I want to examine them in relation to myself and my interest in the genre. Either way though, for all of you who are sticking around, thank you so much, and with that out of the way, let's get into the video. So, as I said, we should begin with where this whole girl games thing came from. After all, there's nothing inherently gendered about games as a whole. No one's debating whether or not Clue, or Life, or Truco are only for boys or only for girls, so what's so different about video games? Why are we trying so hard, still in the modern day, to break the gendered associations we have about video games in particular? Well, as with most things in our late-stage capitalist world, I think it's pretty fair to say we can blame that on marketing. For the most part. See, back in the 70s and 80s, when video games were in their infancy, the world still ran on pretty strict gender roles. I mean, we still do today, but it's a bit better than it used to be in a lot of ways. But that implicit bias made its way into the messaging used to market products. Anything remotely related to guns, war, and violence was boy stuff, and anything pink and frilly and domestic was girl territory. And forget about mixing the two. What do you want everybody at school to shun you and call you a sissy? No, that was unthinkable. Girl things were for girls and boy things were for boys. That's it. That's how it was, and that's how it's always been. So, in that landscape, where there were very real negative social implications for mixing gender roles, it's not too surprising that marketing agencies would push one type of game on boys and another type entirely on girls. In the very early years, again, I'm talking 70s, 80s, early 90s, video games were really just marketed towards boys. It was assumed that girls just weren't interested in video games, and perhaps we can unpack the very much misogynistic implication that because it's techie, girls wouldn't be interested another day, but for now we're just going to accept that as an artifact of the flawed society that we had at the time, and still have today. But as times changed, it became clear there was a potentially untapped market in games for girls. And if you add to that the feminist allure of girl games at a time when it was assumed that games were just for boys, it's not too surprising that we saw a push to make games that would appeal to girls. Now, these first attempts, which were later grouped into the Games for Girls movement, were, as many things from the 90s were, flawed. They were basically all centered around stereotypically girly interests, things like cooking, dress up, and makeup, with the exception of perhaps the Nancy Drew games from Her Interactive, which were normal detective games, just with a female protagonist. But on the whole, they were flawed, but a necessary first step. And they did successfully make it clear that girls were absolutely buying and playing games. And in a world driven by profit, that's something even the men at the top of these companies can't ignore. And this, I think, is where the core associations we have come from. Now, yes, it's also just the wider societal assumptions that we all have about things that girls like versus things that boys like, but when specifically talking about video games, these early girl games had a huge influence on what games my generation associated with girls and which games girls played. You would have never caught me playing a game like Infinity Nikki or Animal Crossing in middle or high school, not only because I was a very different, much less mature person, but also because those would have pegged me, at the very least, as lame and, the very worst, gay. And, I mean, that wouldn't have been entirely wrong, but I would have lost a lot of my friends if I were seen as gay. The people I could have hung out with and who would have willingly associated with me would have been significantly cut down. What I'm saying is that I can understand the desire and impulse to segregate which games different genders are allowed socially to play. Even in the world that I grew up in, the SF Bay Area, an abnormally accepting place, there was a lot of social pressure not to be into certain things and to be really into other things. However, now that I'm officially in my late 20s, those rules and lines that have been drawn around what games people are allowed to play based on their gender seem more arbitrary than ever. So now, with my hopefully somewhat coherent rambling over, again, I ask the question, why are cozy games for girls? Do me a favor and just go into this next section with the understanding that we're taking social pressures and societal norms/stereotypes as a given here. I won't be getting into the nitty-gritty of why girls like traditionally girly things or whether or not that's a problem. Spoiler, it isn't. Also, for the rest of this video, I'm going to be talking about things all you ladies in my audience are probably all too well aware of, so I just want to make it clear I'm mostly talking to my fellow guys. I know you all deal with this on a daily basis, so please don't feel like I'm trying to explain sexism to you. You are much more well-versed than I am, and if there's something that I've missed, please do feel free to share it down in the comments. I always want to improve, and if there's anything I can do to be better in that regard, please do let me know. So, with that said, the main reason I find, when looking into this question, that cozy games seem to appeal to women and girls is the feeling of safety they offer. Let me explain. I don't know if you've played an online game or listened to any online discourse related to any of the more mainstream popular games recently, but it is, shall I say, not a great place to be. I'm talking games like Valorant, COD, Apex Legends, Fortnite, Rainbow Six Siege, those kinds of games. It's no secret that, in general, these communities are just kind of toxic all around. When we're talking broad strokes, you would be hard-pressed to find a match in these games without at least a little misogyny or casual racism. And, in general, that doesn't bother the people who play these games, at least not us men who play them. Sure, it might be a bit annoying to deal with if you're just trying to play the objective and your teammate just keeps being a dick about some culture war thing or the other, but in general, you and I can just tune it out or ignore it outright. For us, this is a one-time thing, a small aggression that doesn't really affect us personally and isn't even directed at us anyway. But for a woman trying to play these games, not only is the fact that they just sound feminine enough to warrant verbal abuse, but that abuse is a constant in their lives outside of the game. Now, this is where I suspect I'm going to lose a lot of you, but hear me out. The society we live in, that thing I was talking about at the beginning of the video, that's what sociologists refer to as a patriarchy. I know, a lot of you, if you haven't clicked off already, are probably rolling your eyes at the mere mention of the word. But hear me out. I'm not bringing this up to try to make you feel bad or like you're a bad person or anything like that. But it is important to know the ways that the world is organized to advantage us and the things we take for granted as men which feed into that patriarchal system. Some interesting distinctions that I found when looking into sexism in gaming were all the different ways that misogyny can present itself in games. Now, I think we all know the whole paternalism thing, exemplified by Mario and Peach, where the woman character is a damsel in distress and the man comes and saves her. That's a pretty straightforward and obvious one. But one that was mentioned in a TED Talk that I listened to is the audio design of different characters in games. I'm not talking about higher pitched voices for feminine characters and lower pitched ones for masculine characters. I'm talking about the sound design itself. They used fighting games as their example, and I think that was a great choice. Although, this does present itself in all kinds of games with voice-acted characters. But in their example, they pointed out how female characters were designed to sound almost sexual when taking a hit, whereas the male characters kind of just sounded more like you would expect from somebody who's being punched in the gut. And these are the kinds of things that make more mainstream games less appealing to the women playing them. And that's not to say that women who do enjoy these games are like brainwashed tradwives or anything. You can engage with and enjoy a problematic piece of media without endorsing the problematic aspects of it. I love Friends. Me and my girlfriend are currently pretty much watching through the entire series again. There's a ton of stuff in there I don't agree with. But I still really enjoy the show, and that doesn't make you a bad person for liking that piece of media. And when you're a woman or any kind of marginalized person living within a patriarchy, if you want to enjoy anything, you're going to have to look the other way for some aspects because it makes its way into every single corner of your life. So just because your sister or friend likes playing Rainbow Six Siege with you doesn't mean they necessarily accept the less savory aspects of the game. Just put yourself in their shoes for a bit. Imagine if every game you played either sexualized, infantilized, or passivated you, or some combination of those. Or the game that you wanted to play, which requires collaboration and teamwork to play effectively, used your actual real voice to make you a target for all kinds of verbal abuse and harassment. You know how League of Legends has a reputation for being a really toxic and just not very pleasant community to interact with? You know how if someone tells you that they want to get into League, you tell them, no, you really shouldn't play League unless you, hate yourself. Well, imagine if every single online game you play is League. Now, I admit that's a bit hyperbolic. There are plenty of great gaming communities out there, and not every online game is going to give you that experience. However, when your everyday life is full of micro and not so microaggressions based on your being a woman, you're probably not going to want to take the chance when it comes to your downtime. And this is why many women just don't even bother with those games. And it's not just the games I mentioned or games like them. Offline single-player games are full of misogynistic messaging too. Whether it's over-sexualization or infantilization, it's something that's really hard to get away from. And I'm not saying that cozy games are totally free of those things either. However, in general, they target their games to women, so things like gratuitous sexualization with no real commentary or damselization, or those kinds of things are far harder to find in games that most people would call cozy. And a lot of that cozy feeling for a lot of people comes from their association of certain themes and mechanics with childhood. So for people who grew up in the Games for Girls era, there's a lot of nostalgia for mechanics reminiscent of Harvest Moon, Barbie Fashion Designer, and the Nancy Drew games. Plus, a lot of cozy games focus on a more chilled out vibe with beautiful art and great socialization mechanics, things which women and girls are socialized to enjoy. And I don't want to fall into the gender essentialist trap of saying that girls like emotions and talking and slow-paced contemplative things, because that just strips away their humanity. We all have varied interests, and there is no reason to link only those things to women and girls. However, those are things that women are, to some extent, taught to like, and if they do, just kind of naturally like them, encouraged instead of punished like they would be if they were a boy. This all leads to the cozy gaming community feeling much more welcoming of women and girls, and the games feeling like they take into account the interests and desires of women and girls, which is something other games just kind of don't really do. Now, none of this is to say that cozy games are only for women and girls. My channel analytics tell me overall it's a pretty even split between men and women interested in cozy games. However, that is vastly different from the non-cozy game spaces where men overwhelmingly dominate. I want to wrap up by saying I don't think cozy games are for girls, like I said at the beginning of the video. No game is for any gender. Everyone can enjoy any game if it interests them as a person. And gendering games is just dumb, pointless, and frankly immature. But while no game is strictly for one gender, cozy games and the community around them have a particular draw that certainly appeals to women at a much higher rate. Though, again, let's not get caught thinking that's because they're women. No, it's because these games and their communities are more welcoming towards women, and being more welcoming means there are more women in them, which then leads them to feeling like a safer space for women to be. I have no doubt that if other games had communities similar to cozy games, there would be just as much feminine presence in those communities as well. It's just that cozy games on the whole are more welcoming to those people and their voices. And that's not even to mention the pronounced indie presence in the genre. Indie games lean very heavily towards the more progressive side in general, at least the ones I've played, and that leads them to being more welcoming to more types of people. And I guess in a way, cozy games aren't really a thing so much as they are a consequence of games that actively push people away existing. There is nothing stopping something like Valorant from being considered cozy other than the way that it makes certain players feel. I guess if I had to sum all this up, I would just want to leave you with this. No, cozy games aren't for girls. Cozy games are for everyone, no matter gender, race, or sexuality, they're for everyone. If you want the vibe that they're offering, they're for you. It's that simple. And if you don't feel you have a place in other gaming communities, you have a place here. And that's something I really love about cozy games in general. But I think that's going to be it for this video. Again, if you have anything to add about your own experience with this topic, please don't hesitate to leave a comment about it, or head over to our Discord and we can chat about it there. Other than that though, don't forget to like, subscribe, and ring the bell so you never miss a video. Thank you so much for watching, and as always, happy gaming.